The big significant thing about The Wall initially was before the album came out, they released a single. It was the first one they'd done since about 1968, certainly in the UK. They'd done promotional singles in America. But that was a huge sea change for Floyd.
It was never intended to be a single. It was just one of those motifs in Waters' 85-minute rock opera that cropped up a couple of times. And it's a classic Waters trick, actually. What it is a drone, which is a pedal point bass line, which doesn't move. There's no harmonic movement, really. And a three-note melodic motif. And it's the sort of thing he would do quite a lot. For instance, set the controls to the heart of the sun, same thing, a drone and a three-note melody, a three-note motif, which just repeats. Same thing with this, with Another Brick in the Wall. Another different key, but same, and minor as well. Now these aren't tunes as such, they're just little nuggets, little motifs that will pepper the piece throughout. And I think it was Ezrin who suggested doubling it up and putting a disco beat on it and making it into a commercial thing. The addition of the kids' vocals made it into a commercial work and a single. Now Pink Floyd would have resisted that at the time. Singles were exactly what Pink Floyd were not about. They were one of the original albums bands. But I think when faced with something as seductive and irresistible as that they couldn't refuse.
It's important to remember that Another Brick in the Wall isn't anti-school or anti-education as it's often being portrayed. It's very much Waters being anti-bad education and bad schools. Waters really is an old school socialist. His parents were very left-wing, members of CND. His father, who ironically died in World War II, had been a pacifist and only fought up because he was appalled at what the Nazis were doing.
There was some flack in some of the papers from people who I'd only heard that single on the radio and didn't know anything about the piece or anything about me or anything about The Wall or what it was about or anything else. I remember a piece saying it was obscene and it was this and that and the other. And I thought, well, you prat, you haven't done your research, you don't know what you're talking about.
There's no way I'm gonna let go.
All the while The Wall was in development, the tensions between the members of Pink Floyd increased and the relationship between Waters and the rest of the band was deteriorating.
To understand what happened between Gilmour and Waters, and indeed the rest of the band, it takes a great deal of reading between the lines. People's recollections so many years on are contradictory sometimes or sometimes vague, and there are things that they clearly won't talk about. But it's quite obvious that while Waters thought that he was carrying the band, the other band members thought that he was happy to do as much as he was doing and that their contributions were still significant. Clearly there was a difference of opinion about that, and it's a pity that they didn't sit down and talk about it in a grown-up manner and resolve those issues. A pity for the rest of us who would have benefited from the resultant work.
Well, it has started on Animals, but this is where the divide between the two of them really starts. And it's very easy to see the duality between them in terms of the traditional sort of good cop, bad cop, nice cop, nasty cop. I think it's a little more complicated than that. Waters is certainly developing serious signs of megalomania at this point.
What we can be clear about is that Waters felt he was the lead of Pink Floyd and that without him there was no Pink Floyd, and the other band members clearly disagreed, as eventually did the courts.
But, you know, I think he had high demands of himself and he expected the rest of the band to come up to those standards. So it wasn't as though he was demanding anything of them that he didn't demand of himself. And, you know, Gilmour did not come up with material in time for the deadline. I mean, he does eventually. They resurrect a couple of songs that were rejects from his solo album. But you can imagine why Waters was frustrated, which isn't to excuse some of his behaviour, but you can see why he felt other members of the band were not necessarily pulling their weight at this point in time.
my confidence in my own lyric writing has not always been that high, and Roger showed a very strong desire to be the lyricist, and we all lazily allowed that to happen.
One, I didn't have any material to offer. David didn't really either. And Roger had begun to think, well, I'm the writer of this band, and I don't want anyone else to write. I'm going to become the... It was the start of that whole thing. So I'm to blame for not having anything, and he's to blame for not encouraging anything to come.
Oh, he wouldn't let us write. What? You know, I mean, that's just so stupid. Desperate for people to write. Always, 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 always.
The miscommunication between friends continued, and Rick Wright, already dealing with serious personal issues, was about to take the fall.
Rick Wright had a huge impact on Floyd musically, but personality-wise, he was quite a gentle soul. He was not the alpha male in the equation. And I think at that point he had issues in his own personal life, which he talked about before he died, issues with his marriage and so on. There is other stuff that went on, which the band have always remained very tight-lipped about, even now. But I think there was an issue that he'd kind of run out of road.
Rick just didn't seem like he wanted to take very much part in it, and it was kind of a frustrating thing for all of us.
Rick was probably split between a feeling of, my God, I don't need any more of this, and the sheer unpleasantness of Roger trying to boot him out.
The issue was that they weren't going to have the album completed in time for Christmas. EMI wanted it for Christmas, and it was a huge bonus if they delivered it before Christmas, which in the light of their financial problems was obviously a big sweetener. And I think a decision was taken by Waters that we will have to go to America, we will have to use session players, we're not going to get this thing done unless we do this.
I was under a certain amount of pressure to finish the project off, and I tried to get Rick to cooperate with me to achieving that end, and he declined, and so our ways parted.
The story is that Waters gave Rick Wright, a timetable that he had to work with. He'd agreed a family holiday, and that seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. The issue was that he left.
As the album is a culmination of all the techniques and styles that the band had used over the preceding decade or so, so the concert was a culmination of all the different things that they'd done in live performances. Back-projected films, giant puppets, surround sound going right around the auditorium. So it's quite a natural progression in that sense, although the audacity of building the wall across the stage and hiding the band behind it was clearly new. I think the band were a little bit shocked about that concept, but once they understood what it was about, then they realised that it did actually need to be done in order to tell a story.
At the time, it was unprecedented, a show of that scale, but the sheer cost of putting it on meant that they couldn't tour it to the extent that perhaps they may have wanted to do so. I mean, it really is the beginning of what you saw in the 80s, with huge productions by bands like Rolling Stones and Queen, and every band that came, Prince, every group that came back and started doing stadiums. The Wall is the beginning of that. It's that point at which, musicians realised that with a bit of corporate sponsorship and so on, just how big you could go.
Despite the major success of both the album and live show, tensions within the band remained. But however volatile the relationship between Waters and Gilmour had been during recording, it was a collaboration that arguably produced some of Floyd's best work.
The tensions in the band at the time The Wall was recorded certainly have an effect on the music. There are some slight references in the lyrics, but the overall angsty feel can't have been anything but enriched by the tensions within the band.
They are barely on speaking terms, and yet some of the best moments on the record come from the collaboration of Roger Waters and David Gilmour. Foremost amongst those is Comfortably Numb, which I think for a lot of Floyd fans is to them what Stairway to Heaven is to Led Zeppelin fans. It's the sort of, the totem track.
The chord sequence of Comfortably Numb was one of the few offerings that Gilmour brought to the project, and I think it was Ezrin who persuaded Waters to engage with it and actually try to do something with it.
I think Ezrin plays a key role, by the way, in this. I mean, possibly without Ezrin, there wouldn't have been any Gilmour material at all on the wall, and we would have lost Comfortably Numb.
And what we have is the most musically rich thing on the record.
Hello, hello, hello. Is there anybody in there? Just not if you can hear me. Is there anyone at home? Come on, come on now.
The verse of Comfortably Numb is a classic minor key Pink Floyd sequence. Now that functions as the verse, so you have the sinister doctor asking, hello, is there anybody out there? But it also functions as the big guitar fade solo. When he comes in for the bridge, we go to the major. It's all very reassuring. But then, where do we go? Which muddies the waters a little. We don't quite know what's happening, which we wouldn't if we're in this woozy state and we've been given something to make us comfortably numb. It's tempting to interpret the distinct personalities at work on that record. Prodding, sinister verses, Mr. Waters, soothing, delightfully numbing, actually, choruses by Gilmour.
It is one of the highlights, not just of this album, but of Pink Floyd's career.
With only a smattering of Gilmour's contributions on the album, The Wall provided an insight into the complexities of Roger Waters' own psyche, and no more so than on the track Nobody Home.
Got a little black book with my poems in.
I think what's interesting about Nobody Home is it seems to encapsulate every musician on the road. A particularly isolated and tormented one in this particular case, but I think it's all about I'm here, you're there, and I can't get a hold of you. I've got all of this. I've got all this stuff that money's bought me that doesn't seem to mean very much. These are my adornments, but I can't even get through to the people I love. So Nobody Home works on that level. He can't get through to the people he loves. But it also works on the idea that when you stack up everything that he's got, his perm and his boots and his silver spoon, and he still picks up the phone and there's still nobody home. He's talking about himself. There's neither anybody home there, nor is there anybody home here. I think what makes it doubly effective is, although, the tune itself, as ever with Waters, is not the most interesting thing about it, he does set this litany of emptiness to quite an elegiac chord sequence, which reflects hymns, reflects gospel music, and it's beautifully arranged as well. It's got a lovely warm, swelling kind of arrangement, which really underlines the isolation of it all.